Yushik, my guy, at this point it's getting harder and harder to defend you. And at the same time, understanding Minkyung's point of view is becoming more painful and more frustrating by the episode. And Yunyoung, wow, she really surprised me in this episode. Beckhyun shocked me with his comment about Minkyung. Hi guys, it's your girl Funnel Pop. If you enjoy deep dives, honest reactions, and breaking down what's really happening beneath the surface, make sure to like, share, and subscribe. Let's get into it. Why did the production team feel the need to add 2 more episodes when episode 17 already makes the endgame couples pretty clear? What twists are they hoping to manufacture at this point? Guys, I ain't gonna lie, episode 17 of Transit Love 4 was genuinely frustrating to watch. Not in a fun dramatic, popcorn kind of way, but in that slow burn, jaw-clenching way where you're sitting there thinking, why is everyone making the worst possible choice at the exact same time? This episode felt like emotional whiplash. Up, down, sideways, and then straight into a wall. And a lot of that tension traces back to Yushik. In past episodes, I read Yushik as deeply avoidant, so I tried to give him grace. I really did. But episode 17 stripped that away. When someone can stay calm while another person is breaking apart because of their choices, that's not emotional maturity to me anymore. That's meanness disguised as composure. The more I rewatch the scene where Minkyong confronts him about the ring, the harder it is to excuse his behavior. At this point, it doesn't just feel avoidant or careless. It feels cruel. This man dated Minkyung for 8 years. 8 to 9 years. That's not a casual relationship, that's a shared life, shared routines, shared plans, shared identity. So when he says things like, I don't have 99% intention to reunite, while walking around wearing a couple ring he made with another woman, that disconnect is painful to watch. You don't get to emotionally half-exit an 8-year relationship and then fully show up for a new one carelessly in the same house. That's not emotional maturity. That's emotional convenience that leaves wreckage behind. And this might just be my interpretation, but it almost feels like he entered this experience already emotionally done, using the show less as a chance to reconcile and more as a place to finally close the door on his ex. And yes, technically, Yushik is allowed to move on. He's allowed to like Hyunji. He's allowed to decide he doesn't want to reconcile. But intention matters far less than behavior. Wearing the ring. Being openly affectionate. Continuing dates while Minkyung is visibly unraveling right in front of him. That's where my sympathy for Yushik really starts evaporating. At some point, what looks like calm rationality stops being maturity and starts looking like emotional cowardice, especially when that calm only exists because someone else is breaking apart for you. Now, Minkyung. This is where things get uncomfortable, because she's both deeply sympathetic and deeply frustrating at the same time. Minkyung is hurting, and her pain is real. That scene where she sits next to Yushik while he's asleep, crying quietly, covering him with a blanket, staring at him like she's trying to memorize his face one last time, that wasn't drama. That was grief. First love grief. Long-term attachment grief. The kind where your body hasn't caught up to the breakup yet. Anyone pretending that scene didn't hit is lying. But here's the hard truth. The way Minkyung expresses that pain is actively pushing Yushik further away. The confrontations. The repeated, "Are you comparing me to her?" questions. The emotional explosions. I understand why she does it, but understanding doesn't make it effective. Every time she demands reassurance from someone who has already emotionally checked out, she gives him more justification to distance himself. It becomes a loop. She panics because he's pulling away. He pulls away harder because she panics. And neither of them knows how to break the cycle. That's the real tragedy of this pairing. Neither of them is completely wrong, but their emotional timing is completely misaligned. Minkyung is still in the middle of the breakup. Yushik is already mentally post-breakup. They're not having the same conversation, even when they're using the same words. And before anyone says Minkyung is overreacting, let's be fair. No one said Jihyun was overreacting when she got upset over Wonkyung giving Jihyun his shirt. If his shirt caused that much discomfort, imagine how devastating it is for Minkyung to see a couple ring. Especially from a man who, by her own account, hated accessories. That tells her everything she needs to know. Does that mean Yushik is suddenly head over heels in love with Hyunji? Personally, I still struggle to believe that. But what is clear is that Minkyung's earlier approach pushed him further and further away. She was too harsh at the beginning of the show, and I wish she had handled those moments differently. Still, I sincerely hope she can turn this around. Not necessarily to get him back, but to regain her agency. To make Yushik choose her by the end of the show, only for her to be the one who ultimately walks away. Not out of revenge, but because of how little he's shown he cares about her. Now let's talk about Hyunji, because this is where my patience really ran out this episode. I want to be very clear. I do not think Hyunji is obligated to protect Minkyung's feelings. This is transit love. Everyone is here to explore connections. But what bothers me isn't that Hyunji likes Yushik. It's how much she wants without ever acknowledging the cost. Hyunji is collecting attention like it's a group project and she's the only one submitting work. Yushik, Seungyong, Jaehyung, plus Beckhyun, whom she's admitted she's been upset about because she didn't think anyone else was his type but her in the house. But with all these men emotionally orbiting her, and yet there's a consistent lack of responsibility in how she navigates that power. Touching Seungyong's hair while having zero romantic intention. Staying in group conversations about Minkyong while being visibly irritated with her when she's around. Allowing the couple ring situation to escalate without any visible effort to slow it down. And yes, even if production sent them to the ring workshop, there were still choices, different fingers, different timing, with a simple, let's wait, could have sufficed. She was uncomfortable over a couple shirt her ex of 5 years wore with Yunnyeong, yet she's perfectly fine wearing a couple ring with Yushik on her ring finger. How does that logic work? Make it make sense. And that moment when Minkyong came to her door said more than any conversation she hasn't had yet. Hyunji's body language after Minkyong left with Yushik wasn't confident. It wasn't grounded. Hand on her side like she couldn't wait to disappear and stay out of the drama. And that's where my issue really sits. Not with her liking Yushik, but with how much she's taken without ever directly addressing the fallout. She hasn't reached out to Minkyong, since she's older and clearly more experienced. She hasn't initiated a conversation. And while she doesn't owe anyone emotional caretaking, avoiding the conversation entirely keeps her insulated while everyone else absorbs the damage. That's the pattern. Staying quiet. Staying agreeable. Letting situations escalate while never fully standing in them. Greed doesn't always look loud. Sometimes it looks like quiet entitlement. Like expecting everyone to understand your position without you ever fully acknowledging theirs. That's why this episode is where Hyunji lost me. Not because she's a villain, but because she's benefiting from chaos without paying for it emotionally. And this is also where I need to say something that genuinely disappointed me. That moment when Hyunji was touching Seungyoung's hair, Beckhyun made a remark that really did not sit right with me. He said something along the lines of, "What's wrong with Minkyung? Didn't she say she didn't want to reunite? Why is she acting like this now? And I'm sorry, seriously. Be for real right now." Coming from him. That felt wildly lacking in self-awareness. This is a man who struggled to let go of a relationship that ended 5 years ago. He carried emotional residue into this house just like everyone else. If anyone should understand how hard this was for Minkyung, who dated for 9 years according to the show's timestamp, and had only broken up for just 3 months, it should be him. If anyone should have understood that saying, I don't want to reunite doesn't magically turn off grief, attachment, or instinctive reactions. It should have been Beckhyun. That comment made Minkyung sound irrational, when in reality she's reacting like someone whose breakup is still happening in real time. It reduced her pain to inconsistency instead of acknowledging it as unresolved emotion, and that bothered me more than I expected. Especially seeing Hyunji agree with him, knowing she was once Minkyung's roommate, knowing how much Minkyung struggled emotionally back in Seoul, and knowing how deeply she herself was hurt when Beckhyun ignored her. And that wasn't even half as cold as the way Yushik is treating Minkyung now. My gosh. The disconnect there left me genuinely perplexed. What's interesting is that the Seungyong-Minkyung collaboration situation didn't actually come out of nowhere. It started during a conversation between Seungyong, Hyunji, and Beckhyun. Seungyong joked that he would drive a wedge between Yushik and Hyunji, and she smiled as she repeated it to Beckhyun. At the time, it played like banter, light strategic humor. Something you laugh off and move past. But that joke didn't stay a joke. When Seungyong later approaches Minkyung and starts coaching her on how to confront Yushik calmly instead of explosively, it's not spontaneous. It's the execution of something that began as casual scheming. And this is where the contrast becomes uncomfortable. Because while Seungyong is playing emotional chess, Minkyung doesn't feel like she's playing at all. She's not maneuvering for leverage or screen time. She's reacting from a place of real emotional consequence. At this point, it honestly feels like Minkyung is the only person treating this situation with its full emotional weight. Everyone else is maneuvering. She's surviving. Now let's talk about Seungyong properly, because he is insane, just not in the way people usually mean. His desire to disrupt Yushik and Hyunji's connection out of desperation mixed with strategy should be applauded. He knows he's losing Hyunji emotionally, and once he realizes that romance alone isn't enough, he pivots hard. So he does the one thing he thinks could actually shake her. He brings up marriage. Which means reality, stability, and the future. He even throws in another line, saying he'll get her a department store VIP ha ha ha. This guy is too funny. This shows exactly how he thinks. This isn't about flirting anymore. This is about positioning himself as the safest long-term option, something Yushik, at least right now, simply cannot offer. But here's the moment that really shifts the board. Hyunji tells Seungyong that she's going on an unofficial date with Yushik the next day. Not production assigned, but they're chosen. That one detail alone tells Seungyong everything he needs to know. He's already behind. So instead of pulling Hyunji closer directly, he starts manipulating the environment around her. Honestly, I don't think his strategy was working at that moment, which is why he brings Minkyung into it. Seungyong knows Minkyung's emotional volatility has been pushing Yushik further away. So he coaches her, telling her not to explode. Not to corner him. Because if she comes at him aggressively about going on a date, Yushik might shut down completely. And to his credit, the advice works. Minkyung approaches Yushik more calmly. Yushik listens. He even responds with more understanding than we've seen in a while. But here's the key part. Understanding is not the same as reversal. But reversal is not impossible. Minkyung asks him if he would regret his choice. And even though we never got that answer, the emotional answer was already there. He doesn't soften in a way that suggests doubt. The distance remains. His mind seems to be already made up. But I still believe that Minkyung can still win his heart back if only she can stop being emotional and re-strategize. So was Seungyong manipulative this episode? Yes, absolutely. Was it calculated? Also yes. But is it out of place on a show built on emotional chess? Not really. Seungyong understands something Yushik doesn't even try to offer. And that is attraction alone won't win this. He's betting logic against emotional pull. And honestly, it's beginning to look like he can totally win his ex back if he pushes harder but more gentler. Beckhyun and Yunyoung were the rare moment of stability in this episode, which is wild considering how unconnected they usually are. Their honesty felt grounded. Not perfect, but grounded. And in an episode where everyone else is spiraling, that matters. They're not explosive. They're choosing clarity. What really stood out to me was Yunnyeong choosing to understand Beckhyun, even after he openly expressed lingering feelings about his ex up until that point. She handled it in a way that actually looked really cool. She didn't compete or panic. She just listened with understanding. And then there's the ring conversation. Beckhyun asked what was in her farewell box and she spoke about the ring Jae-hyung returned. Beckhyun realized her ex might have had lingering feelings, to have kept the ring for that long. I think this thought might have added more layers to his likeness for her, since even her ex found it hard to let her go. Beckhyun also made it very clear how serious rings are to him. He said that making a couple rings and wearing them isn't casual for him. That whoever he does that with is the person he intends to marry. That context matters a lot. Knowing how he felt about wearing couple rings, she later told him and Woojin later that night that Yushik made couple rings with Hyunji and they've been wearing the rings. Actually, after hearing that, even if he had a little feeling left for Hyunji, it would completely evaporate from him because rings aren't just cute accessories to him. They're commitment. A big deal. So ironically, even though Yunnyeong was a little messy this episode, telling Minkyong about the ring, and now telling Beckhyun. I didn't like the impact it had on Minkyong, but I enjoyed the effect on Beckhyun. His mind is completely stripped off Hyunji at this point. Sadly, we might never get to see them caressing each other again, ha 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 ha. Nice gameplay Yunnyeong, her strategy was cruel but it worked in her favor. Now, speaking of Jae-hyung. I read a comments that said, Beckhyun's crutches had more screen time than Jae-hyung in episode 17, and I almost cried laughing. Because why is that actually true? Jae-hyung had so much potential on this show. So much. But the moment he publicly locked himself into, I'm sticking with Jae-hyun till the end, that was the start of his downhill arc. His storyline just flatlined. I honestly wish he had stuck with Minkyung. That pairing had so much potential. He could have been a major player, and instead he faded into the background. And the smaller storylines matter too. Ji-yeon doesn't look happy. It's almost like she's sending message to Won-kyu and not getting any back from him snapped her into reality. But now, she's fully back with Woojin, quietly reopening emotional channels. Ji-hyun too didn't look so happy either. But, for the first time, she sends her message to Won-kyu. She finally gave him a chance lol. It seems this show should no longer be called Transit Love, or Exchange, it should be called Back to Your Ex by Force ha ha ha. As we move toward the final stretch, people aren't chasing novelty anymore. They're chasing familiarity, safety, and closure. So here's my prediction. Minkyung is going to break again in episode 18, and it's going to be worse. That breakdown will either force Yushik to finally have a clean, definitive conversation, or it will completely sever whatever emotional bridge remains. Hyunji will be forced to choose, not because she suddenly becomes decisive, but because the environment will stop allowing her to stay comfortable in ambiguity. And Seungyong's pressure will either crack her confidence or expose that she was never as sure about Yushik as she thought. Thanks for watching. If you've been enjoying these deep dives, like and subscribe. This show is emotionally heavy, and your support really does decide whether I keep covering it.